Hi everyone, so welcome to our video number 3. In last two videos we discussed about the steps and proficiency test. We discussed about that in video number 2. In this video I will discuss about how to improve your reading and speaking skills if you're giving IELTS, which I think you should, instead of trying for PT, TOEFL or CELPEP, because it's most widely accepted throughout Canada. So let's start. What's reading? So in reading module there are 3 paragraphs. There will be lots and lots of questions. There will be 40 questions, not lots and lots, but there will be different type of questions. Some of them are reading a picture, some of them would include match the following or choosing a heading, doing a conclusion of whatever the writer wrote in there, fill in the blanks, mm, multiple choice questions. So there is a huge variety of questions that you will see in reading module. And reading module is divided into 3 paragraphs. So each paragraph is divided into questions. uh, Two of them would have 13 and 13, and one would have 14 questions. Sometimes I've heard people say that uh, the last module is the hardest, but I don't believe that, and you shouldn't believe that either, because there is no easy or there is no hard. All of them are the same. But what happens is, sometimes when you are choosing a heading for a paragraph, that's when you get confused. So that's why people, I think, get confused that it's hard. It's not hard, it's just you don't have much practice with that, because whenever we are reading a book or a newspaper paragraph, we don't that pay that much attention to the heading. But heading is very important when you're doing reading, especially if you are doing IELTS reading, because there's, I think, 7 to 8 questions sometimes. So that's makes a huge difference of what's band you'll get if you skip those questions. uh, yeah, so let's get started with what are the things that you should consider. So the first and the foremost thing I would tell you that you should read as much as you can. That's what I did, at least when I started preparing for IELTS. I gave my uh, I used to read all of the newspaper, not all of it, but I would spend at least an hour on reading articles. Depends, if you like sports or celebrity, you can focus on that part, or you can get a novel if you like to read that. Doesn't matter, it doesn't have to be an inspirational novel. As long as it's in English, it doesn't matter. You are reading it just to improve your English, so it doesn't have to be a technological or a motivational or any kind of novel. It can be anything, whatever you want to read. And that's the only thing I think I should tell you. There's You'll find hundreds and hundreds of videos or even articles of people telling, oh, how to get better in English. There's no other way. If you don't practice it, you don't get good at it. There is one trick, but that only works if you know what you are doing. The trick is, don't go through all the paragraph. What I do is I just go to the questions first, and then I start to figure out, oh, this question, the answer is here, or this is the answer. And most of the time what happens is, all the questions in the paragraph are in sequential order. So if you find one, that means that's where you start from. So it's easier, but it only works when you know what you're doing. If you don't practice that much, then it gets hard. So focus on modules, do some modules too, but don't just rely on modules, because what happens is you get limited information on those modules, because you'll not get all of the modules, because you can't practice everything. In main exam they can ask you anything, so don't just get limited to that. Just read more English paragraphs or books or a newspaper. That will help you grow your knowledge instead of restricting it. So that's what I would suggest. And the second part I'm going to talk about is speaking. Speaking is, I think, people have more hard time because they have to do in-person speaking. For most of the people, that's the hard part. They can speak, but when it comes to speaking to a stranger or giving like an interview, that's when they have problem. Because what happens is they get a bit overwhelmed with all the people around them, and when they go to the interview they're like, oh, I don't know anything, or I'm scared or I'm nervous. So for that, I would suggest is that you can practice when you're preparing for IELTS. Practice with, if you're going to an institute, ask them to give different instructor every time. It's not possible, but at least they could do it at the end, like just before 4 or 5 days of your exam. Ask them to give you a different instructor every day, because what happens is when you go to a final exam, you will be expecting there will be someone new, so that you don't get that much nervous. This trick works sometimes, but it doesn't always work. So there's another thing that you could do is you could go home and talk to your friends or your family members, because what happens is we, like it happened with me too, we get a bit nervous when we're talking to our friends or family in English, because we're like, oh, what are we going to talk about? It doesn't matter if they can speak in whatever their language speaking, but you can speak in English. That will, what that will do is that will help improve your self confidence. Because what happens when you're giving your speaking test, the score depends on how much confident you are when you're speaking anything. Because if you're not confident, then you'll be doing stuff which you are not supposed to do in exam. It's like stopping in between. And yeah, I'm gonna discuss about the whole thing here, so let's just get into that. So the speaking is divided into three parts. The first one is introduction. You go into the room, there will be the instructor will be sitting in a chair in front of a table. You go there, there'll be a chair, you sit on that, you start your introduction. It depends, sometimes instructors are there on the gate waiting for you, and then you do a handshake, and they'll ask you to have a seat, and then you get started. So the first part is introduction, where they will ask you questions related to your studies or yourself or your family. So you can say whatever you want, but it's easier if you just tell them, because it's an introduction, so they're trying to just figure out what's going on with you, or who are you really. And the second part comes the cue card, which is, I think, where most of the people have trouble. And I can see why we have trouble, because we don't have that much practice, especially speaking with speaking English. Listening maybe because we watch a lot of movies, but speaking we don't have that much practice. So what you could do about cue cards? So cue cards, you just write bullet points. And what I try to do is I try to write like short forms, not all of it. Like let's say if they ask me to talk about something, I'll just write who, when, why, where, how. That's the question I'll ask myself, and then I'll arrange them in chronological order, like what I'm going to talk about first, and then how I'm going to make it a conversation of, not a conversation but a monologue of 2 to 3 minutes, because that's how long you have to speak. You can't stop in between. As long as they don't stop you, you don't have to stop, you just keep speaking. And whenever you're trying to take breaks like normal breaks, that they look like natural breaks. So like right now I'm speaking and I'm taking breaks. At least I'm trying to take breaks when I'm taking my breath, so that the instructor thinks like, oh, he's taking his breath, he's not stopping. So that's the time when you uh, have to prepare yourself, that you'll think what you have to talk about in the next few seconds when you're taking your breath. You'll get good at it as if you practice more, but if you don't practice enough, even then, if you speak just like the normal language and don't use many idioms or phrases or acronyms or synonyms, even then you would be able to get at least 6.5 to 7 bands. But it depends on how confident you are. So let's come to the last part of the IELTS speaking. That's the cross questioning or detailed discussion. So what happens is, once you are done with your cue card, they'll ask some of the questions from cue cards, which are like, let's say you talked about something in cue card, and then they'll ask you why you like it, or why you do it, or how you did it. So that's something that you have to be prepared for. And what happens is sometimes we make up things in our mind, but then when they ask about that in cross questioning, where we don't have any idea of what's that. So if you are talking about something that you don't know, you have to be prepared that you might get a question for this in cross questioning. It's not like you don't have to be correct if you say that moon has life on it, it doesn't matter. You can say whatever you want, but the only thing is that you have to say the same thing when you are doing your cross questioning. Otherwise they'll be like, oh, he doesn't understand what he's talking about. So that's the important part. The important part is not that you are lying. The important part is that you have to say the same things in all three parts. You can't say one in the first one, second something else in the second, and something else at the end. So that goes for our speaking. And now there are some other things that I would like to add, is that if you are following uh, an website or an app or an institution, try to stick with one source. Don't change your source, because everyone has their own way of doing it. And then if you try to follow four people at a time, it'll get confusing. I'm not an instructor, so I'm not going to give you any like do this or do that. These are just the basics. If you follow these ones, even if you are teaching like taking your classes from someone, it'll be helpful for you in the long term and even for your exam. So that's what I would suggest. Don't follow two or three people at a time. And the other thing is the mother tongue dialect you that we have, like especially I'm not sure about anyone else, but North Indians have a strong dialect. So when we are talking, it feels like, oh, we are not talking in English, while we are talking in English, but it's not. We have our that mother tongue dialect, like some of the words we can't pronounce them correctly. So you should practice on those words. And the best way to do that is you start speaking every day, and then you record yourself. Don't make a video recording, just make an audio recording, and then you can track your progress as you are going after a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks. And the other thing is, speaking is not something that you can't find your mistakes by yourself. Like in writing, it's hard to find your own mistakes because you are not an instructor. But for speaking, when you are listening to your audio, it would be obvious that this is where you need to improve. Because if you are taking too much time, or you are stopping in between too much, or you are thinking too much, doing like uh, that kind of stuff, then you will figure out that this is the uh, place where I need to work on myself. So that's another trick for speaking, which I followed at least, and I would suggest that you should do that too, because you have your own progress report with you, so you can see how good you are doing from last week. And that concludes our video for the day. And please let me know if there's anything else you guys or girls wanted to add. And maybe I'll make another video regarding listening and writing. I'm not sure, I'm not an instructor, so I wouldn't, I know what to do, but I'm not sure if there's anything helpful could tell you guys. But I will try, if I get enough time, I'll try make another video about listening and writing. But that's all for now. Thank you so much, and have a nice day. Maybe see you guys again.